Take three. Okay, I finally figured out what the technical problem was. So, hello and welcome to Business Lessons from the Military. I'm your host, Kevin Bemmel, and we're here every Tuesday at 10 a.m. Pacific time to talk about military history, doctrine, and the practices of great military leaders, and take those lessons and apply them to our business lives. So, today, my topic or the show is titled "Keep Your Feet Dry." So what's that about? I mean, how does that apply to business? Well, so if you saw the thumbnail, you saw it talks about when compromise is best. And I think this is a difficult topic to deal with because most of us don't want to compromise. We want to, stick to our guns. We want to be strong, and all of that kind of thing. Whether it's in a negotiation, whether it's in dealing with our employees and the standards for running our companies, whether it's holding to our own values and ethics. I think our tendency is to not compromise. And in fact, in many ways, the word compromise it's become sort of like a dirty word. So, I mean, especially in politics, which I'm not going to talk about, but even just we use the term, the person was compromised, as that, meaning that they were put in a position that reflects badly on them. But the fact of the matter is that many things, perhaps most things in business, will not happen unless we compromise. And that can take many forms, okay? And the fact of the matter is, as much as I talk about how we need to be clear about our values as a business, we need to be clear about our values as individuals. The reality is that most issues that we deal with in business, they're not issues of right and wrong. So, for example, if we're considering two different approaches to a marketing campaign, that's unlikely to be a moral issue per se, unless we're talking about some sort of very vulgar advertising or something like that. But the fact of the matter is, there is likely not a moral issue there. And so compromise can be a way to come to something that will work and that the team can broadly support, right? So I'm going to relate what we call what the Navy calls a sea story. This is a story about something that happened during my career, and show you how in this case my uncompromising attitude was to my detriment. So one of the most awe-inspiring things that I did during my career as a chaplain in the Navy was I participated in burials at sea. So if someone was a sailor or a Marine, when they die, they can apply to, I believe it's through the Veterans Administration, to have a burial at sea performed. Now, I did one on an aircraft carrier, and in that case, I wasn't actively involved with it, but I was there when it was done to observe and see sort of the protocol and all of that. And then a couple of years later, when I was stationed with the submarine squadron at Point Loma, there was a request by a submariner. Submariner's family, really, that he be buried at sea from a submarine because he had spent his Navy time on a submarine, albeit probably not a nuclear sub like what we have today, but I think he was a World War II veteran, if I recall. And so one of the submarines was given the responsibility for conducting this burial at sea. And the captain of the boat asked me if I would come along to kind of do the chaplain's part of the service. So of course, right, that's one of the reasons why I'm there. So we get underway, and by the way, dress on a submarine is pretty casual. So normally you wear uh, what amounts to coveralls or overalls or whatever, which is it's kind of this blue one piece thing that zips up in the front. I think it zips in the front, and you wear your black boots and a t-shirt underneath it, and that's pretty much it. That's what you wear day in and day out on a submarine. It's very practical uniform for working in the submarine environment. But this is not the appropriate dress for a burial at sea, as you might imagine. And so we were directed to bring what are called our service dress blues. Now, if you've ever seen a movie about the Navy, that's the uniform. It's basically a black suit, at least for officers. You have gold braid on the sleeves indicating your rank. It's a double-breasted suit with brass buttons, 2 rows of brass buttons, and you have your cover, which is the white cover with the black bill and etc. And you wear with that black Oxford shoes, because that is the prescribed shoes that you wear with that uniform. If you go into Navy regulations, you will see it. It says exactly what is worn. Like, for example, this is something that I never could quite understand about the service dress blues uniform. You would think if you're wearing black Oxford shoes, you would wear a black leather belt with the uniform. No, you wear this sort of cotton black belt with a brass buckle that you slide it through, and it's really I don't know. It's just not what you would think it would be. Certainly, that was not what they wore in World War II. By the way, I think the reason they did that is because it's less expensive than a leather belt, right? So I bring my service dress blues with me in the zippered case, and I bring my black Oxford shoes, and we go out to sea, and we find a relatively calm area. The boat is is on the surface. Now, when a submarine is on the surface, if you're in the conning tower, of course, you're way above the surface. But if you're on the deck of the submarine, there's only about this much of freeboard, meaning that the water is washing over the deck of the submarine on a regular basis. Now, that deck is covered with a grill. And so what happens is the water ships over the side, it goes through the grill. So you're not standing in water, but water is constantly shipping through and then draining out. Now, I had never been on the deck of the submarine before. I'd been underway before, and I'd been in the conning tower, but I'd never been on the deck before. And so we get out there on the deck, and the first thing I realize is everyone else on the deck is in their service dress blues, but they're wearing their black submariner boots. And I'm thinking to myself, I wonder why that is. And within, a minute or two, I found out why. That's because water shipped over and it flooded my feet, and I now had, wet, salty feet throughout the rest of the burial at sea. So, I mean, look, I did my part and whatever. And after it was, and by the way, one of the reasons why we have to be in our service dress blue uniforms is because there's a videographer taking a video of the ceremony, which is sent to the relatives of the person being buried, so they can see their loved one being buried at sea. That's in the end, that's the point, right? Because they're not there with us, right? So there's one of the sailors is kind of off to the side, and he's with a video camera taking a video of all of this, right? So I'm standing there in my wet shoes. Of course, you couldn't see the wet shoes on video, and indeed, The reason the other, my colleagues were wearing the black boots is on that video, you couldn't tell the difference between my black Oxford leather shoes and the black submariner boots, which are essentially, waterproof, right? What I did succeed in doing is essentially ruining my shoes, salt water and leather, not a good combination. But from my perspective, right, it was wrong because the uniform regulations required that I wear my black Oxford leather shoes with the uniform. That's what it required. So no compromise, wear these shoes. And for my trouble, I got to spend, $110 buying a new pair of shoes. Now you can say, oh, that's a little thing. And you're right. It is just a little thing. I learned my lesson very inexpensively, although I was the butt of many a joke among the submariners after that because, I didn't know enough to keep my feet dry. Right. So that was lesson number one. Lesson number two, which was that same burial at sea. So when we actually, so there's a canister with the ashes of the deceased in it, and those ashes get spread on the water. And before the ceremony, the captain of the boat explained to me that we weren't going to be actually dumping the ashes of the decedent during the ceremony from the deck. And he said, we're going to use flour. And I said, wait a minute, you're going to take a video of this ceremony that's going to the decedent's relatives, but we're not actually spreading his ashes. It's going to be flour. And he said, yes. I said, why? He said, just trust me on this. It'll be a good idea. Right. And so the time comes for us to spread the ashes. And we do so. And a wind blows up and poof, blows them back in our face. Now, think about that for a minute. What got blown in our face was flour. If it had been the actual ashes, the ashes would have been blown in our face. Ugh. Really, boy, just not a pleasant thought at all. And then later that day, from the conning tower, we dropped the ashes in a way that they wouldn't be blown back up into our faces. And that was the actual burying of the ashes. And they kind of spread out on the deck, but then we submerged and, they were washed off the submarine and the burial was completed. As far as the family knew, that second, emptying of the canister didn't take place. As far as they knew, the original emptying of the canister was the burial of their family member at sea. Right? And you say, well, that's dishonest. Well, okay, maybe. But look at it this way. Which is better? Dropping the real ashes from the deck of the boat, having it blown in our faces, we go take a shower and wash it down into the drainage system of the submarine, or having the ashes all actually be essentially washed into the ocean, right? That's our choice. Now, maybe you would argue, well, people should be told that, and maybe they should. But the reality is that these compromises were being made for very good reasons. And in the end, nobody was really hurt by them. The fact that that I was the only one wearing the authorized shoes, the people who saw the video couldn't have told the difference. The fact that what they saw being dumped wasn't actually the ashes of their relative. But in the end, the point of the burial was for their relatives' ashes to be put into the sea, right? And we did accomplish that. And we actually accomplished it better by using the compromise than we would have by not compromising, right? So I think this gives us the standards, if you will, to help us understand when should we be compromising, even when the rules are quite bright. Now, by the way, uniform regulations are not. They're not moral rules. Okay, so when I use rules in this context, I don't mean ethical principles. Okay, what I mean is, rules about how things are going to be done. Regulations might be would be a better, I guess, a better term. So we didn't violate any ethical rules. We did violate some regulations. To the best of my knowledge, there is no exception in the regulations for burials at sea from the deck of a submarine. But this was the sort of tradition of the way the submarine service handles these things, right? And so I think there's one lesson that we can take from this is we don't violate our morals and ethics when we don't compromise in a way that violates our morals and ethics, but we can compromise in violating rules and regulations if it's appropriate. When is it appropriate? When doing so makes the meeting of the mission better, right? So you could argue, and this is why I use these two different examples. You could argue that the dumping of flour was making a lie of the burial at sea. Now, that's kind of a something to discuss over bourbon, I suppose. But the reality was the ashes were relegated to the sea, just not on the video. So the video wasn't exactly true, but we still fulfilled our mission of seeing to it that the ashes were put in the sea. And we actually did that better by using by compromising a bit. You could even say using a small subterfuge. Okay, we accomplished that better than if we had been absolutely strictly, according to Hoyle, as my dad used to say, in how it was done. So that's, I think, is the second standard is, are we fulfilling the I just lost the word, the real essence of what it is we seek to accomplish, right? So it's one thing to break a rule or a regulation, but if doing so accomplishes the spirit of our mission, the spirit of our task better than if we don't compromise, then I think we have a basis for making that compromise. Okay. Now, I think we can apply these two standards very broadly, but we have to be careful about it. Okay. So, for example, we want to be honest people. We don't want to lie. Okay. But sometimes telling someone the absolute truth is really going to hurt their feelings and damage the relation, and thereby damage the relationship. And so I think it's okay at times to not be brutally honest. Okay, because I think we want to be honest, but not brutally so. So if you look at the Talmud, which is it's really sort of the basis of traditional Judaism, it says that at times it's okay to tell what we might call a white lie if doing so will better preserve a relationship and the feelings of the person, right? So, the sort of classic example of this is when a wife would ask her husband, how do you like my dress? And he thinks it's hideous, right? It's like, what is to be gained by saying to the woman, your dress is hideous, or to your wife? Nothing, nothing. Oh, it's very, very nice. Very nice. You look very nice. Okay. I think that's a perfectly acceptable thing to say, even if you're in our heart of hearts, we really don't think it looks very good. Now, that might depend. Now, some women maybe want to hear, the absolute truth. They really want to know, do I look good? Like maybe they're getting dressed for an important job meeting, and they want to look their best. They want to look professional, and so, in that case, compromising on our on our honesty, if you will, may not be the best path, because the second part, attaining the spirit of the mission, may be lost in doing so. So, if a wife is going on, like I said, a meeting for a job, and she's dressed, I don't know, in tennis clothes, and this is a very professional job that she's going for, so it probably wouldn't do to say, "Oh, you look nice." That's just right. You probably, even if she's a sensitive person, need to find a way to say, do you think that dressing in tennis gear is appropriate for going to a meeting at this particular firm? It seems like it's a very, buttoned down firm, very professional, and it seems to me to be working at cross purposes, right? So we need to take these two issues into account before we decide whether to compromise or not. Number one, what are we really compromising on? Are we compromising on our morals, our ethics? Or I just gave an example where, one could again make the case that, well, but we not lying, that is morally lying is wrong. Well, okay, but also treating people kindly and appropriately, that's part of my moral code. And so sometimes two moral values compete. And so how do we resolve that competition, right? So when being honest could cause somebody to feel pain, and maybe needlessly so, then this moral rule gives way to this moral rule from my perspective. Okay, now you may size that up differently, but I don't believe in brutal honesty. So I believe that, when the two compete, sometimes it's okay to, I wouldn't say lie outright, but to shade the truth. Okay, so we need to look at that, and then we need to also consider, will compromising help us to meet the mission better, more effectively? And this is particularly true in a negotiation. So when we're going back and forth trying to make an agreement over a particular business matter, which is more important, sticking to our guns or having the deal happen, right? And in most cases, coming to some kind of arrangement so the deal can go forward is probably more important than whatever a sort of prurient joy we'll get from, oh, I stuck to my guns and I won. I won. The deal didn't happen, but I won, kind of thing. I think that's really problematic to look at that sort of zero sum game as a tool in our business and professional lives. It's better to look at, where can I make strategic compromises or tactical compromises that will allow me to meet the goal or meet the mission of this endeavor. Okay, maybe I'm not going to get 100% of what I want, but nonetheless, if I can get 50%, is that good enough? Okay, in my experience, when there's a successful negotiation, I think both parties think they got about 75 or 80% of what they wanted. Now you say, how could that possibly be? Well, because sometimes, well, most of the time, there are certain mutual interests, and typically the mutual interests seem to make up about at least 50% of what's being worked out, and the other 50% ends up getting split about 50-50 or maybe 20-30, something like that. So that's why each side feels, well, I got about 75 or 80% of what I wanted, and so I'm gonna go forward. So those are the principles that I submit to you for consideration in deciding whether to compromise in a particular business or professional situation, and in relationship situations. As we go through our daily lives, and this is one of those shows where I would be particularly interested to hear your thoughts on my idea, or my ideas about compromising. Like I said, I think this is a somewhat fraught issue in society today, and I have a friend. His belief is you have to be absolutely uncompromising in various areas of your life. By the way, he doesn't apply that to his business life, fortunately, and because of that, I think that's how he's been able to build success. But I'm not sure that being completely uncompromising in many, especially or most areas of our lives, is necessarily a good policy. I think we need to be very judicious about being uncompromising, because oftentimes compromising is best, or is the better option. So I thank you very much for joining me today. Sorry about the sort of technical glitches at the beginning. Tomorrow at 10 a.m. Pacific time is my show, People Making Money. And it's our monthly economic echoes, where we take a look at economic data and see how will this affect our lives as individuals, right? Because as I say this, pretty much every time I talk about this show, we don't live in the national economy. We live in our own individual economy. And so when we look at this data, we need to figure out how is this going to affect our lives, the lives of our families, and what do we need? What should we be doing about that? So I invite you to join me tomorrow again at 10 a.m. Pacific time. And then next week at 10 a.m. On Monday at 10 a.m. Pacific is my show, Trusts and Estates Weekly. And 1 week from today is the next edition of Business Lessons from the Military. So thanks again for joining me. Really appreciate it. Love to hear your comments. Good, bad, agree, disagree, especially disagree. Always like to hear those. They help me, think more about my ideas and refine them. So please do submit them. All the links to social media will be in the show notes when this episode posts on YouTube. So have a wonderful rest of the day. And signing off as I always do, Marie, darling, you are my bell.